Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. I'll try and stay on time. Hopefully I don't have too many slides today. So the real point here is the bottom line, build, buy, or hybrid. There's a lot in the 171 controls, 110 controls, 14 families. If you have the ability to do your entire institution, that's great. I doubt it. You might want to build. If you really want to have an isolated environment, you probably want to buy, or if you want to connect to some environment that you've protected, that would be a hybrid. So again, the current state of controlled research support. So typically the contracts come into OSP, the research office and GRC review the awards, and if they have the 7012 or other clauses, then the hair stands up on the back of your neck. The first thing that happens is you've got to triage these incoming proposals, understand the security requirements, understand export control, which means that the project needs a technology control plan. If it's CUI, it's going to need a system security plan. With the respect to the DFAR 7012, it requires the 171 security controls with a project-specific plan, but there's really no certification around that. There's no CMMC at that point. Where the 7019 clause comes in, it requires a project to submit the scores of the system security plan to the Supplier Performance Risk System, or SPRS, as we call it. That score tends to run from minus 220 to 110. I think the first time we had an environment that was not ESNet, I'll qualify that, our score was about a minus 110. So just to set the frame for where you start off typically. And then there are the 2021 or 7021 clauses. That's the full assessment by the C3PAO, the Certified Third-Party Assessment Organizations. And to your point, you have to pass. You can't, unless you have POAMs that are doable within a year, you must pass that. So the graphic shows kind of how these three controls impact around 171 Rev 2. This is kind of an overlap. If you look at level 1, level 2, and level 3, it was mentioned yesterday a little bit. NSPM kind of sneaks in there because many of the NSPM 33 controls are kind of built into the 17 controls, but there's others around international travel and cybersecurity training, things that potentially could be, in our case, related to a loaner laptop program. What are you going to do specific for NSPM 33? And in the way we look at it, it's kind of all one big bubble. We don't have any interest in the level 3 controls, but with respect to 171 for regular CUI, we're looking at essentially it's 110 controls plus the 61 NFO controls that were mentioned. Those aren't described. Those are kind of understood as best practice, and you should be doing that anyway. Sorry. Apologies. So this is kind of the overlapping sphere where this all fits together. CMMC 2.0 encompasses pretty much most of the DFAR and some FAR aspects, and then NSPM 33 kind of fits in there with its controls and the families related. Oh, I don't have pictures here. Unfortunately, this is a graphic that I don't have. It'll be on the Cyber AB site if you look at it. This is kind of the ecosystem of what the CMMC is. It's related to all of the different pieces, the assessors, the trainers, the KCO they call it, the organization of all the different pieces of putting the certification aspect together. As was mentioned, the Title 32 rule is expected on October 24. My understanding is that it will probably be to the point where we're going to see contracts probably by June of 2025, potentially, with CMMC regulations. Again, this is just a graphic from Cyber AB that shows all the different pieces. But the Cyber AB is the official body of the CMMC and oversees the organization, providing training and certification for the C3PAOs. The CMMC level 2 rules are both DFAR and FAR that come together. Like I said, probably by June of 2025, and then CUI requirements include adherence, assessment, and reporting of compliance with NIST 800-171-R2. Doing this. Apologies, not used to this. Timeline. This is essentially what's been discussed, but by 5/24, the Title 48 proposed rule was out. By June of 24, the Title 32, which was the program itself, the establishment of the program. In 9 of 24, the Title 32 review was done. 10 of 24 should be published. Like you said, we're waiting any day now. We should see that CMMC is real and it's going to impact all of us. And then December of 24, potentially CMMC will launch and the program will begin. And then, as I said, anticipated date for the 7021 clauses will be in next year, probably middle of the year. Keep hitting the wrong button. Sorry. So why a secure research enclave or regulated research enclave? The backstory, CMMC is part of CHIPS and Science Act. And there's a lot of kind of overarching controls and kind of special callouts for CUI that might be considered a little bit different than others, and that's for the semiconductor industry. The controls were required for CMMC level 2 to protect the systems with controlled unclassified information. Additional controls, like I mentioned, for NSPM 33 are closely aligned with the level 1 of CMMC, cybersecurity maturity model certification. Again, it's the final rule is this year, expect contracts in 25 and new and in awards by June of next year. So what must be considered for 171R2 compliance? You need a segmented architecture. You need segmented identity and access and security requirements. It's across institutional contracting and program management is needed because it starts in OR&I, Office of Research and Innovation, goes into Office of Sponsored Programs. It includes ITAR, EAR, export control, and then it also, you got to turn to your IT or in your GRC organizations, and everybody should hopefully be on the same page. So if this is a lift that you're going to take, the question is, do you want to continue or do you want to accept DoD contracts? Because this will be the underlying bar of whether you can or you can't. And so from a service perspective or team's perspective, there's the core services. So you need virtualization, you need storage, compute, file shares, source code management, workstation deployment, all of these things. We're already doing that a lot with our export control office and with the TCPs that researchers have to put together for their projects. But also on the side of the security infrastructure, you need VPNs, firewalls, networking, endpoint protection, IAM, multi-factor authentication, logging and SIEM, and configuration management. These aren't done in one area and they're not done by one team. Other resources that are needed are systems automation. Hopefully, in the future, we can get that mature. The CUI training, a project with CUI, all the team has to go through training, not just the general security training, but also the university with NSPM 33 has to have basic security training for, in my understanding, is the entire university, including students. So that has to be pushed out. Change management, this is huge. You can't bring in new contracts and build new environments without change management processes, IR, in change management and IR, whether you do this in an enclave in the cloud or you do it on campus, they still have to be tightly coupled. The plans, the policies need to cover all aspects of this, including your enclave if you're doing it separately like MSU. So this is kind of what a shared responsibility model would look up like. So the decision that MSU made was, one, we want to continue to receive DoD contracts. Two, we've already had researchers refuse DoD contracts or others with CUI because of the system security plan. My template for an SSP is about 120 pages long. That's just to come up with your answers. So in this case, it's not, we chose a cloud provider, so we decided to go with Azure GCC High with a E5 tenant, but there's still responsibilities on our campus, right? We can't just say, okay, cloud service provider, you do it all for us. There's shared responsibilities and there's individual responsibilities on campus, policies, especially guidance and standard operating procedures that definitely need to come to be developed in order to show adherence to the 110 controls. So in our case, it took about a year just to pull together the leadership across the several organizations, to write an RFP, and then to go through the process of evaluating the different vendors. In our case, we chose Azure GCC High. I won't name names, but the cloud service provider we worked with was highly experienced in this, and they had a relatively rapid timeline for actually getting this done. And honestly, we're at 11 weeks right now, and we're bringing our first CUI contract into the enclave this week. It's a mobility grant from the Department of Defense, the Army, essentially. So for just that, right, understanding that that this is something that your university or your organization wants to do, there's a lot of planning in place, a lot of decisions that need to be made, and a lot of money that's going to be required to get it done. And that's independent of the assessment. I still don't know, and maybe you have an idea of what an assessment's going to cost. I've seen anything from $20,000 to $120,000. So it would be nice to know where we're at with that respect to that. So again, for the IT planning and build, what we decided to do was essentially build a completely isolated enclave that is not connected to the campus. Now that was a decision we made to start with. That means our Azure AD from campus is not what we're using in the regulated research enclave. We're using a segmented, separate AD where we are not connecting instrumentation on campus. That will come in the future when we understand the environment and have upskilled our own teams enough to be able to do that. Right now, we're relying on a managed service component with the contract with the cloud service provider. And they helped with understanding how we do identity management, more importantly, how we do multi-factor, because that was the one thing that definitely falls into play with this because of the break glass connections and some other things that have to be maintained. Network services, how are we going to interface when network campus network is involved in some of this, and as well, our log reviews, our monitoring reviews, our security reviews. We're not carrying out the security components, but we still have a campus responsibility to have all the processes, procedures, guidances, and standards in place that we're following with all of these different components. For us, this is kind of a timeline of the future decision points. We have decided to build the enclave and hire a cloud service provider. We have not yet, well, we do have an authority to operate. We've gotten to that point, and we're about ready to bring in our first project. We are not ready for an assessment. We're nowhere near ready for an assessment. From my understanding, is we need to have 85% of all things that would be assessed in place before we can even contract with an assessment organization. That's kind of why I had asked you about, is there a friendly team that we can find to even understand if we're at 85% or not? That's going to be hard to answer. So now we are going to onboard our first project. We're starting to address the POAM. So even though we've got a third-party cloud provider, they're highly experienced. We've also hired them to do the managed services for 3 years. We've got in that is all of their training called Evolve 360 that is included in that. And then also they have a compliance team that we engaged with as well. And between the managed services team and the compliance team, we get 20 hours a month from the managed services folks. We get 10 hours a month from compliance. They help us work on the documentation that the university is responsible for. They have to have everything, all policies and procedures for the cloud, but not necessarily for on our campus. That's on to us. So the questions then become, are we going to upskill? Are we going to take on this lift to do this within the university, or are we just going to keep paying a third-party provider? Problem with that is they can't get CMMC certification because they are independent of us. So I still have to find someone that's going to be able to do that and work with them. So a lot of decisions that need to be made probably from the senior leadership of your organization. Even though we have the enclave up and running, we cannot get a score of 110 for almost a year because we have to have months of documentation. We have to have logs. We have to do log reviews. We have to do risk assessments and risk rating based on those logs and monitors and security. We've got Sentinel, we've got Intune, we've got Defender for cloud, Defender per endpoint. All of these things are generating tons of data, but that doesn't mean that we're compliant and we can be certified. We still have to collect more data to get to that point. Again, that's a university decision. Are we going to spend the time and money to bring all of this in-house, or are we going to figure out how to keep it running under a managed service? And hopefully by November of 2025, MSU is ready to actually go through and get the certification and bring in true CUI projects under CMMC. So this is the overview. Yeah, I think I'm okay on time. Should be near the last. So the quick 90-second overview. Implement cybersecurity in accordance with 171. That's through the current 7012. There's 320 objectives, assessment objectives. That's not just 110 controls, but the controls necessitate artifacts. And those artifacts could be log files. They could be risk assessments. They could be your incident response plans. How does that go from the cloud provider to the campus? The change management, all of these things, right, require some documentation that I can show the assessor when they come in, and I can dot a line between the assessment and all the artifacts that I have to make readily available. And that's my other problem is how do we make sure we have all of the readily available artifacts? Then we need to hire and pay for a third-party organization to carry out the assessment. And typically a self-assessment annually after we get assessment between when that third party comes in, which is, I'm not sure if it is every 3 years or if it's necessarily, I think it is within 3 years, and in between you have to do the assessment yourself or bring someone like RCOP potentially in to help with that. A perfect score is required, 110 of 110 within 180 days of the assessment. And that's the 6 months on the POAMs that hopefully will be extended a little bit. Level 1, again, that's for federal contract information. That's the 17 controls we talked about, very similar to the NSP 33, except for, you know, a few things related to education, training, malign foreign talent, and international travel and things of that nature. Level 2 protects CUI. Level 3 protects CUI associated with the Department of Defense with higher levels of clearance. And DoD is telling vendors to do this via contract. They tell you if you have to do this. It's not like I'm going to go do it because I want level 3. And then this is a very small number of the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base. Again, this is for very small numbers of institutions. But in our case, the contracts coming into the Office of Sponsored Programs with CUI are probably 1 out of 300. So it's not a big deal right now, but it will be as the focus on getting more of these contracts. And when we see Department of Education and others start throwing these at us as well, you know, there's a strong motivation for at least planning for CMMC level 2. And any questions or answers? I think I'm on time.